We're going to be very select in this installment, and in fact, we're going to focus more on the people than the papal. Because the subject is the Grand Tour. This was the traditional cultural sightseeing trip, a voyage through Europe that mainly upper-class European young men, though some women, but certainly the one common denominator is they all had lots of cash, well, that they took through Europe over a course of months or even years. When this really got started was in the 17th century, and to say precisely when the concept of the Grand Tour first reified, well, it'd be a bit difficult, but one good date to hold on to is the cultural trip that was taken in the year 1613 and 1614 by the stage designer and architect Inigo Jones, accompanied by the Earl of Arundel, who was his name Thomas Howard, the 21st Earl of Arundel, who later would become one of the most important patrons in the history of English art. Well, these two folks visited a whole range of sites, and starting in April, well, shortly after April of 1613, where Jones and the Earl of Arundel took in the architecture of Genoa and Vicenza and Venice, very, very important, Padua, Florence, Rome, Naples, amongst others. And this is where Inigo Jones, who really was the first great British architect and certainly the first Renaissance British architect, took in the works of Palladio, especially in the Veneto region. Well, the two of them, I mean, this trip was so successful and, in fact, so influential, especially since Inigo Jones returned to the position of surveyor of the king's works in England. Well, the two of them have been taken to popularize the Grand Tour with the English, and basically it would just become more and more important. During the stay of Jones and Arundel in Rome, I mean, they stayed for 5 months in 1614. I mean, they really took in the city. Well, they were hosted by the Marchese Vincenzo Giustiniani, one of the great Roman noble families. One of the stunts, so to speak, but he did this out of generosity and hospitality, was for Arundel, the Earl, to excavate in the Forum. And not just that, he purposely buried statues that would be readily found. They had been planted specifically for his noble English guest. Well, you can just imagine the sensation that this would cause once these were toted back to England, because that's also part and parcel of the whole deal. Well, in addition to the cities that Jones and the Earl of Arundel visited, well, Milan, of course, would be on the itinerary, Bologna, Siena, and Naples would grow even more in importance in the 18th century, especially after the discovery of Pompeii in 1738 with the unearthing of Herculaneum, where the architecturally one can get an even better sense of the old Roman city, because that's the one place you can see 2 stories preserved. Well, this habit of this set itinerary, there was no canonical itinerary, but you will see the same major European cities again and again. And in Italy, I think I've named pretty much the principal ones. Well, this flourished really until the 1840s, when one sees large-scale rail transit, and which made actually this type of voyage much cheaper, and basically was affordable for the first time to what one might identify as the middle class. The point of all this was to soak up as much as possible of the cultural legacy, particularly of classical antiquity and the Renaissance, but also there's an important social reason. This was to gain exposure to the aristocratic and intellectual society of the European continent. I'm speaking really from the British perspective here. We're in the period before great public museums, and so personal connections were absolutely key. And it's interesting to see the negotiations that take place in order to get into this villa or that palazzo and the like. Many of these folks kept careful diaries, and so we have a very good sense of precisely what they saw on what day and how they were able to see it. And often there'd be a professional guide or tutor called a cicerone, named after the great Roman writer, philosopher, orator, Cicero himself. Well, it would be a vast enterprise to examine the grand tour in the 17th, 18th, early 19th centuries, especially since it's not just the English, of course, that are taking this, but eventually you even have visitors from the New World. What we're going to do is to look particularly at the Grand Tour as it pertained to the Villa Ludovisi. I mean, if we make that the target site, well, I think there's quite a lot one can learn about the mechanisms of the Grand Tour and also what would have caught the eye to visitors. And we also have a very good idea what the Villa Ludovisi in its original state looked like, in addition to the many, many representations and etchings and the like, which included some of the figures that we've seen, for example, in the 18th century. Very, very important, Piranesi, who in many respects is the artist par excellence of the Grand Tour, but also Vassi, his prints that he published in 1786. Well, we have, by an amazing stroke of luck, a late 19th century photo collection, and you've seen some of these already in the course. Ignazio Boncompagni Ludovisi, and we'll talk a bit about him in the subsequent lectures as well, because he's an absolutely fascinating character. But in the winter/spring of 1885, he commissioned a comprehensive photography campaign to capture the Villa Ludovisi. Why? Because they were soon going to dismantle it. And here is Anthony Maianlotti talking a bit about the Villa Ludovisi and how it fits in to the culture of the Grand Tour, but in particular, what happened in the 19th century, why it had to go.
The end of the 19th century was the twilight of the aristocratic villa in Rome. Apart from the Villa Ludovisi, many other aristocratic villas fell to the pickaxe and the tractor and the bulldozer of the developers, whose work it was to turn the sleepy papal city of Rome into a modern Italian capital. Villa after villa was divided up, parceled out, sold off, and built on. Villa Ludovisi is lucky in that it has the Villa Aurora that remains. Almost no other villas inside the walls still stand to testify to their existence, which lasted from the 15th and 16th centuries to the end of the 19th century. Villa Altieri was a woman's prison. Villa Massimo Lancelotti was given to the church. Villa Astali now is a convent where nuns live. And many other villas completely disappeared. Villa Montalto was devastated and destroyed to create the Termini train station. And even the villas outside the walls were not free from this developer's frenzy, the febbre edilizia, the building fever. It was possible in those years of speculation to buy a piece of property at a high rate, mortgage that piece of property to build the first floor of a new building, mortgage the first floor of the building to build the second floor, mortgage the second floor to build the third floor, and so on, in a kind of pyramid scheme that was bound to collapse. And in fact, in the 1890s, it did. It burst a bubble. And the last great building to be constructed in this scheme for about 10 years was Palazzo Piombino, now the American Embassy, built by the Boncompagni Ludovisi. But other villas still survive. The Villa Borghese was acquired by the state in 1901 and became a public park. The Villa Medici was bought years before in the 19th century and became the French Academy, and still stands not far from here with its gardens intact. The largest villa of them all, Villa Doria Pamphili on the other side of the river, remained in the hands of the aristocratic family who built it until the 1960s, when it was acquired by the state. Now its gardens are open to the public, but the villa building belongs to the government and is only used for the signing of treaties. The remainders of the statues in this garden are still of a very high quality. Behind me, there's a headless statue, a funerary statue of a woman wearing a very gauzy dress, which conceals her hands and conceals her arms. And not far from me is the famous Ludovisi Jupiter, which is one of the most important pieces that still remains in the possession of the family.
Well, Ignazio Boncompagni Ludovisi, in his photo campaign before the Villa Ludovisi would be dismantled and shrunk down to a fraction of its size, really comprising just the original Palazzo, the Palazzo Grande, and also the Casino Aurora, which we've seen so much of and we'll see a bit more of. Well, in all, there's 107 different views of the Villa Ludovisi that have come down to us through the photographic medium. There are 70 large format and 89 smaller format photos. There's 159 distinct images in all that Ignazio Boncompagni Ludovisi took. And the artistic merit is very high, and the treatment is often very clever. Now, what I'm calling the large print photos, the 70 large print photos, well, they're actually well known. They've been, in fact, fairly often reproduced. Now, thanks to the fact that the grandnephew of Ignazio Boncompagni Ludovisi, Francesco Boncompagni Ludovisi, as governor of Rome in 1930, he presented an album of those images to the Museo di Roma. But as for the other ones, well, with Princess Rita Boncompagni Ludovisi planning to publish a book that will see all the photos published for the first time in one volume. Let's now take a look at some descriptions of the Villa Ludovisi by grand tourists, so to speak. Well, remarkably, the English writer and diarist John Evelyn, who was born in 1620 but is a 24-year-old, in November of 1644, he paid a visit to the villa just a month and a half before Niccolo Ludovisi married Costanza Pamphili, the niece of Pope Innocent X, in what was going to be a fateful and very important match. And we've looked briefly earlier in the course at his engaging and revealing account of the Villa Ludovisi at this time, an account dated to the 10th of November, 1644, and where he talks about there's a few things that he outlines, which one is going to find in pretty much every subsequent account, no matter who is writing about the Villa Ludovisi. The extent of the ground, how large it is, considering that it is in a city, says John Evelyn. And also, to continue, in every quarter of the garden are antique statues and walks planted with cypress. And then he continues, to this garden belongs a house of retirement. Here he's talking about the Villa Aurora. Built in the figure of a cross after a particular ordinance, especially the staircase. Well, the staircase attributed to Carlo Maderno in the Villa Aurora catches everyone's eye. He continues, the whiteness and smoothness of the excellent pargeting, this is his word for decorative plaster, was a thing I much observed, being almost as even and polished as it had been of marble. And above, there's a fair prospect of the city. So in other words, he was able to get into the Torretta. After talking about some of the artworks, a German clock, the marbles, columns, urns, vases, various statues, even the amphorae, the Roman amphorae, which were housed outside the villa, he turns to the Palazzo Grande. And here's what he says. In the palace, I must never forget the famous statue of the Gladiator, spoken of by Pliny the Elder he's talking about, so much followed by all the rare artists, as the many copies testify, dispersed through almost all Europe, both in stone and metal. What he's talking about here is what this so-called dying gladiator we would now call the dying Gaul. and it was found in situ on the grounds of the Villa Ludovisi, and it found its way into the family's collection by 1623. And later, Pope Clement XII Corsini acquired it, and he placed it in the Capitoline Museums, where it has pretty much sat until, in fact, this past year, when it traveled to Washington, D.C., and was exhibited as part of a year-long celebration of Italian cultural heritage in our National Gallery. But Evelyn continues. There is also a Hercules, a head of porphyry, and one of Marcus Aurelius. Here's the bust of Marcus Aurelius from the Ludovisi collection. You can find it now, like many others of these statues, in the Palazzo Altemps. And here is the one extremely memorable portion of Evelyn's account. In the villa house is a man's body, flesh and all, petrified, and even converted to marble, as it was found in the Alps, and sent by the emperor to one of the popes. It lay in a chest or coffin lined with black velvet, in one of the arms being broken. You may see the perfect bone from the flesh, which remains entire. It seems that he is seeing this in the Villa Aurora, this petrified alpine caveman, so to speak. He also mentions another statue in the same breath, the Rape of Persephone in marble. It's of the purest white. It's the work of Bernini. It's interesting to see that even a generation after the execution of this sculpture, and very much during Bernini's lifetime, the Rape of Proserpina, finished when the sculptor was just 23 years old, this sculpture remained in the possession of the Ludovisi, then the Boncompagni Ludovisi families, all the way until 1908. They purchased it in 1622. They received it as a gift in 1622 from Cardinal Scipione Borghese. But the Italian state purchased the statue for exhibition in precisely the Galleria Borghese, so it's not to be found in the Altemps with the other statues. He continues, in the cabinet near it, that is the statue of Proserpina, are innumerable small brass figures and other curiosities. But what's really impresses him here is a bed. What some look upon as exceeding all the rest is a very rich bedstead, which sort of gross furniture the Italians much glory in, as formerly did our grandfathers in England in their inlaid wooden ones, inlaid with all sorts of precious stones and antique heads, onyxes, agates, cornelians, esteemed to be worth 80 or 90,000 crowns. 80 or 90,000 crowns for this bed. Now, 1 crown in this day was equivalent to 5 shillings, and 5 shillings in 1644 represented more than an average workman's weekly pay. So this would be 90,000. The wages of it would take 90,000 weeks for a average workman to earn the price of this bed. He continues. There's also diverse cabinets and tables of the Florence work, besides pictures in the gallery, especially the Apollo. And he finishes, a conceited chair to sleep in, with the legs stretched out, with hooks and pieces of wood to draw out longer or shorter. So this was basically, it's amazing to see what catches his eye. This retractable chair, which in some ways was the progenitor of the modern lazy boy. Almost 6 months later, John Evelyn still could not get enough of one of the curiosities he had seen. It was that natural mummy, which evidently had been discovered frozen. He makes a note in his diary for the 4th of May, 1645, passing the Ludovisi villa, where the petrified human figure lies, found on the snowy Alps. John Evelyn obviously had a particular eye for the lavish, unusual, exotic, even the grotesque, but he points up a crucial fact about the Villa Ludovisi that was one of its most impressive attributes. It was entirely situated within the city walls. And he also noticed the ingenious winding staircase in the Casino Aurora that Maderno had designed.